Carl Jung discovered that empaths aren't just sensitive souls who feel too much. They're carriers of an ancient psychological blueprint that most people never access. Jung documented this in his work on archetypes and the collective unconscious, revealing that empaths walk a specific hero's journey that transforms overwhelming sensitivity into an evolutionary superpower. But here's what Jung found that changes everything. The very trait that makes you feel like you're drowning in everyone else's emotions is actually the compass pointing toward your most authentic power. You're not broken for feeling everything. You're activated for something most people will never experience. Right now, if you're an empath, you probably feel like you're constantly absorbing the weight of the world. You walk into a room and immediately sense the tension no one's talking about. You feel your friend's heartbreak before they even mention their breakup. You carry emotional burdens that don't belong to you, and you can't figure out how to put them down. Jung called this the beginning of the hero's journey. And what you're about to discover is that every painful moment of overwhelm has been preparing you for a transformation so profound, it doesn't just change your life, it changes everyone around you. Because here's what Jung understood that modern self-help completely misses. Empaths aren't experiencing a problem that needs fixing. They're experiencing a calling that needs answering. The sensitivity isn't the issue. The issue is that no one taught you how to navigate the psychological architecture you were born with. Jung spent decades studying what he called the individuation process, the journey from unconscious sensitivity to conscious power. And he discovered something that will completely reframe everything you think you know about being an empath. You're not just feeling other people's emotions. You're accessing the collective unconscious, the shared psychological patterns that connect all of humanity. This means your overwhelm isn't personal weakness. It's impersonal power that you haven't learned to channel yet. And Jung mapped out exactly how to make this transformation. Let me share a composite case profile that perfectly illustrates what Jung called the empath's initial crisis. Consider Maria, a narrative example based on patterns Jung observed across multiple cases. Maria came to Jung because she was falling apart. She could feel everyone's pain, but she had no container for it. Her mother's anxiety became her anxiety. Her colleagues' frustration became her frustration. She was drowning in a sea of emotions that weren't even hers. Jung recognized this immediately as what he termed the call to adventure in the hero's journey. Maria wasn't experiencing mental illness. She was experiencing a psychological threshold. Her sensitivity was forcing her to confront something most people never face: the shadow aspects of the empath archetype. Jung identified two primary shadow patterns that empaths encounter at this stage: the victim and the martyr. The victim believes their sensitivity is a curse they must endure. They see themselves as perpetually wounded by a world that's too harsh for their delicate nature. The martyr takes on everyone's pain as a badge of honor, unconsciously believing that suffering for others gives them purpose and worth. In this composite case, Maria embodied both. She felt victimized by her sensitivity while simultaneously taking pride in her ability to absorb everyone's darkness. Jung understood this wasn't conscious manipulation. It was unconscious self-protection. These shadow archetypes emerge because the raw, unfiltered experience of feeling everything is so overwhelming that the psyche creates defensive patterns just to survive. But here's what Jung discovered that transforms everything. These shadow patterns aren't obstacles to overcome. They're catalysts for growth. The victim shadow teaches you that you need boundaries. The martyr shadow reveals that you're seeking external validation for an internal gift. When you can see these patterns operating in yourself without judgment, you've taken the first step toward conscious empathy. Jung found that most empaths spend years, sometimes decades, trapped in these shadow patterns because no one taught them what they were experiencing. They think something's wrong with them. They try to shut down their sensitivity, to build walls, to numb out. But Jung warned that trying to eliminate sensitivity is like trying to eliminate breathing. It's not a choice. It's your nature. The real work isn't learning how to feel less. The work is learning how to feel consciously. And that begins with recognizing that your initial vulnerabilities, the overwhelm, the boundary issues, the energetic exhaustion, aren't weaknesses. They're invitations to develop a form of psychological sophistication that most people never access. This is where Jung's concept of the collective unconscious becomes crucial for understanding empaths. Jung discovered something that completely revolutionizes how we understand empathic sensitivity. Empaths aren't just picking up on individual emotions, they're tuning into what Jung called archetypal patterns in the collective unconscious. These are universal human experiences that exist beyond any individual person. Think about it this way. When you walk into a room and feel the tension, you're not just sensing Bob's frustration with Karen. You're sensing the archetypal pattern of conflict itself. You're accessing ancient, psychological structures that humans have been experiencing for millennia. This is why empathic experiences often feel so overwhelming. You're not dealing with personal emotions. You're channeling transpersonal forces. Jung mapped out what he called the trials and tribulations of the empath's journey. These are predictable stages that every conscious empath must navigate. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The alchemist's path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. First, there's energetic absorption. You take on emotions without realizing you're doing it. You leave a conversation feeling drained, anxious, or depressed, and you don't understand why. Jung recognized this as unconscious empathy, the stage where you're open to everything with no discernment about what's yours and what isn't. Second, there's boundary confusion. You struggle to distinguish between your feelings and other people's feelings. Your partner is stressed, and suddenly you're stressed. Your friend is depressed, and suddenly you're depressed. Jung understood this as the dissolution of the ego boundary, a necessary but terrifying phase where your sense of self becomes porous. Third, there's energetic fatigue. You're exhausted all the time because you're carrying weight that doesn't belong to you. Jung saw this as the dark night of the soul for empaths, the moment when you question whether you can continue living this way. But here's where Jung's insights become revolutionary. He discovered that at each stage of this journey, archetypal guides and allies emerge to help you navigate. These aren't external people, though they can manifest as mentors or teachers. They're internal psychological forces that activate when you're ready for them. Jung called these the wise woman, the protector, and the alchemist. The wise woman teaches you discernment, how to sense what's yours versus what belongs to others. The protector teaches you boundaries, how to create energetic space without shutting down your gift. The alchemist teaches you transformation, how to transmute the emotions you absorb rather than just carrying them. These aren't metaphors. Jung understood them as real psychological structures that exist in the collective unconscious. When you're truly ready to evolve beyond victim empathy, these guides activate within you. You start developing what Jung called practical wisdom, strategies for navigating empathic experiences consciously rather than reactively. One of Jung's key insights was what I call emotional discernment in real time. This is the ability to pause when you feel an emotion and ask, is this mine? Where did this come from? What is this emotion trying to tell me? Jung found that empaths who develop this capacity move from unconscious absorption to conscious witnessing. They can feel the emotion without becoming the emotion. Another crucial strategy Jung identified was energetic protection through psychological integration. Most empaths try to protect themselves by building walls or shutting down, but Jung warned this is impossible for true empaths. The walls always crumble eventually because your nature is to be open. Instead, Jung taught empaths to protect themselves through integration, by consciously working with their shadow material so they're not unconsciously attracting or absorbing everyone else's darkness. This brings us to the most important part of the empath's journey, the transformation from burden to gift. Jung documented a phenomenon he called the belly of the whale moment. This is when everything you thought you knew about your sensitivity completely inverts. The overwhelm that felt like it was destroying you suddenly becomes the doorway to your deepest power. But this transformation doesn't happen automatically. It requires what Jung termed conscious suffering, the willingness to stay present with your experience without numbing, avoiding, or spiritually bypassing. Let me share what this transformation looked like in Maria's case profile. After months of work with Jung, she had a breakthrough that illustrates this perfectly. We see this dynamic clearly in the story of Maria sitting with a friend who was going through a devastating divorce. Previously, Maria would have absorbed her friend's pain completely, taken it home, and carried it for days. But this time, something shifted. In this narrative illustration, Maria felt her friend's grief. She didn't shut it out or build a wall against it, but she also didn't merge with it. Jung had taught her to create what he called a psychological container, an internal space where she could hold the emotion without becoming it. She could witness her friend's pain with deep compassion while remaining anchored in her own center. Jung called this the integration of shadow aspects. In this case profile, Maria had spent years unconsciously playing the martyr, believing that absorbing everyone's pain made her valuable. But through conscious work, she realized this pattern was actually preventing real connection. When she carried everyone's emotions, she wasn't truly helping them. She was enabling their unconsciousness and exhausting herself in the process. The transformation happened when Maria reclaimed her power. She stopped seeing her sensitivity as something that happened to her and started seeing it as something she could work with consciously. Jung helped her understand that true empathy isn't about taking on other people's emotions. It's about holding space for those emotions to be felt, processed, and transformed. This is where Jung's concept of the empowered empath archetype emerges. He identified three primary expressions of this archetype: the healer, the innovator, and the compassionate leader. The healer empath understands that their gift isn't fixing people. It's creating space for people to feel safe enough to do their own healing. They've learned to be present without absorbing, to witness without merging, to care without caretaking. Jung found that healer empaths often work in therapeutic fields, not because they're trying to save people, but because they've learned to hold transformational space consciously. The innovator empath uses their sensitivity to perceive patterns and possibilities that others miss. Because they can feel into the collective unconscious, they sense where human culture and consciousness are moving before it becomes obvious. Jung found that many artists, inventors, and cultural pioneers were empaths who learned to channel their sensitivity into creative innovation rather than emotional overwhelm. The compassionate leader empath brings their gift into structures of power and influence. They lead organizations, communities, or movements with a depth of understanding that comes from their ability to sense what people truly need, not just what they say they want. Jung recognized that empathic leaders have the potential to transform entire systems because they can feel into the collective wounds that drive destructive patterns. Here's what's crucial to understand. These empowered expressions don't emerge by suppressing your sensitivity or learning to feel less. They emerge by going deeper into your sensitivity and learning to work with it consciously. Jung called this the paradox of empathic power. The more you embrace your gift, the more powerful and less overwhelmed you become. But there's something even more profound that Jung discovered about this transformation. When empaths move from unconscious absorption to conscious channeling, they don't just change their own lives, they change the energetic field around them. Jung found that empowered empaths become what he termed psychological transformers. They actually help transmute collective emotional patterns just by being present. This isn't magical thinking. Jung understood it as a psychological reality. When you're no longer unconsciously absorbing and carrying emotional density, you create space for that density to transform. Your presence becomes what Jung called a temenos, a sacred container where transformation becomes possible for everyone in your field. This composite example demonstrates this directly. As Maria integrated her shadow patterns and stepped into empowered empathy, her relationships transformed. People no longer unconsciously dumped their emotions on her because she wasn't unconsciously inviting it. Instead, they felt safe enough in her presence to actually process their own emotions. She became a catalyst for other people's growth without sacrificing herself in the process. This is what Jung meant when he talked about the resurrection phase of the empath's journey. You don't just survive your sensitivity, you resurrect as something entirely new, an empowered empath who brings transformational gifts back to the collective. But Jung warned about something crucial that most spiritual teachings about empaths completely ignore. There's a dangerous trap waiting at this stage of the journey. It's what I call the enlightened empath shadow, the unconscious belief that becoming an empowered empath means you've transcended human struggles and now exist on a higher plane than others. Jung documented case after case of empaths who did the inner work, integrated their shadow, and developed conscious sensitivity, only to fall into a new form of spiritual ego. They started seeing themselves as more evolved, more conscious, more spiritually advanced than the unconscious masses. Jung called this inflation, when the ego identifies with archetypal power and forgets its human limitations. This is the peak moment of crisis for the empowered empath. You've done the work. You've transformed your sensitivity from burden to gift. You can feel into the collective unconscious and sense things others can't perceive. But now you face the ultimate test. Can you hold this power without becoming superior? Can you embrace your gifts without using them to separate yourself from others? Jung found that this crisis manifests in specific ways for empaths. You might start judging people for being unconscious. You might feel frustrated that others can't see what you see or feel what you feel. You might withdraw from regular human connection because you feel like no one operates at your level of depth and awareness. This is exactly where the shadow escalates, because the moment you start believing you're different in a way that makes you better, you've actually regressed. Jung understood that true empowerment doesn't separate you from humanity, it deepens your connection to it. The most conscious empaths recognize that everyone is on their own journey, and sensitivity isn't a hierarchy, it's simply different forms of human experience. This narrative profile illustrates the crisis about a year into her transformation. Maria caught herself thinking, why can't people just do their inner work like I did? Why are they so unconscious? Why do I have to be surrounded by people who don't understand what I understand? Jung helped her see that this was her ego attempting to protect itself from vulnerability by creating separation through superiority. The breakthrough in this case came when Maria realized that her sensitivity wasn't making her special. It was making her responsible. Responsible not to fix people, not to judge people, but to hold space for the full spectrum of human experience, including unconsciousness, including shadow, including all the messy, beautiful, broken, and brilliant expressions of being human. This is the actual climax of the empath's journey Not the moment when you master your gift, but the moment when you recognize that mastery means staying humble, staying open, staying connected to your own humanity while holding space for others' humanity. Jung's final insight about the empath's journey is what he called returning with the elixir. This is the phase where you bring your gifts back to the collective, not as a savior or superior being, but as a fellow human who's learned to navigate sensitivity consciously. Jung found that empaths who complete this journey don't just transform themselves. They transform the entire field of human consciousness around them, not through preaching, not through teaching, but through embodiment. Your very presence becomes medicine because you're modeling what conscious empathy looks like. Here's what this actually means in practical terms. When this composite Maria completed her integration process, she didn't start a coaching business, or write a book, or create a healing practice. She simply returned to her regular life, her job, her relationships, her community. But everything was different because she was different. In this narrative example, her colleagues noticed that meetings felt different when Maria was present. The energy was somehow calmer, more productive, more creative. Maria wasn't trying to manage the energy. She was just present without absorbing, witnessing, without merging. Jung would say she was holding the tension of opposites, staying open to what was emerging while remaining anchored in her own center. In this case profile, her friendships deepened because Maria stopped playing the role of emotional savior. She could be with people's pain without trying to fix it. She could celebrate people's joy without feeling envious or diminished. She had developed what Jung called differentiated relating, the ability to be deeply connected while remaining psychologically separate. The family dynamics in this story shifted because Maria stopped unconsciously carrying the emotional weight of the family system. When her mother got anxious, Maria felt compassion but didn't take on the anxiety. When her brother struggled, she offered support but didn't rescue him from his own process. Jung recognized this as the ultimate act of love, allowing people their own journey while remaining present and available. This is what Jung meant by the gift brought back to the collective. Wisdom and deeper connection, not wisdom that separates you as an expert, but wisdom that connects you as a fellow traveler. Not connection that demands others meet you at your level, but connection that meets people where they are while maintaining your own center. Jung found that empaths who reach this stage become what he called cultural carriers. They carry the possibility of deeper human connection just by being themselves. They don't need to announce their gifts or prove their worth. The quality of their presence speaks for itself. But Jung also warned that this isn't a permanent state. The empath's journey isn't linear. You'll cycle through these stages again and again at deeper levels throughout your life. Each time you expand your capacity, you'll face new challenges, new shadow material, new opportunities for integration. The goal isn't to arrive at a final destination. The goal is to stay conscious through the entire spiral of growth. This composite Maria discovered this truth herself. Years after her initial breakthrough, she faced a new layer of her martyr shadow when her daughter was born. Suddenly, she was absorbing her child's emotions in ways that echoed her old unconscious patterns. But this time, she recognized what was happening. She knew how to work with it. She had the tools to stay conscious, even in the midst of new challenges. This is the power of Jung's framework. It's not a one-time fix. It's a map for lifelong conscious development as an empath. If you've recognized yourself in this journey, understand that every stage you're experiencing is exactly where you need to be. If you're in the overwhelm of unconscious absorption, that's not failure. That's the call to adventure beginning. Your sensitivity is waking up, and it's asking you to learn how to work with it consciously. If you're struggling with boundaries and feeling like you're drowning in other people's emotions, you're in the labyrinth. This is where most empaths get stuck, thinking something's wrong with them. But Jung would tell you, this is the necessary dissolution phase. Your old ego structure is breaking down to make room for conscious empathic capacity. If you're beginning to sense your power but struggling with superiority or separation, you're at the threshold of empowered empathy. This is the most delicate phase because it's so easy to fall into spiritual ego. But if you can stay humble, if you can recognize that your sensitivity doesn't make you special, it makes you responsible, you're about to break through to something extraordinary. And if you've integrated your gifts and you're bringing them back to your community, you're living the return, you're showing others what's possible just by being yourself. This is sacred work, and Jung would honor you for it. Here's what I want you to understand. Jung's research shows that empaths aren't just sensitive souls trying to survive in a harsh world. Empaths are evolutionary agents. You're the people who sense where consciousness is trying to go before it becomes obvious. You're the bridge between the unconscious and the conscious. You're the transformers of collective emotional patterns. The world needs your gifts, not your martyrdom, not your victimhood, not your spiritual superiority. The world needs your conscious empathy, your ability to feel deeply while staying centered, to witness pain without absorbing it, to hold space for transformation without trying to control it. Your sensitivity isn't too much for the world. The world is finally ready for what you've always been able to access. This is your time. This is your calling. And Jung's framework gives you the map to navigate it consciously. Carl Jung spent his life studying the individuation process, the journey from unconscious living to conscious selfhood. And he recognized that empaths walk a unique version of this journey, one that requires tremendous courage, deep self-awareness, and a willingness to stay present with overwhelming experiences. The hero's journey of the empath moves through predictable stages: the call to conscious connection, navigating the labyrinth of emotions, the transformation from burden to gift, and the return with wisdom for the collective. At each stage, you face shadow material, you encounter archetypal guides, and you have the opportunity to grow in consciousness. But the most important thing Jung taught about empaths is this: your sensitivity is not a problem to fix. It's a calling to answer. When you stop fighting your nature and start working with it consciously, you don't just change your own life, you change the consciousness of everyone around you. You become a living example of what it means to feel deeply while staying centered, to be open while maintaining boundaries, to care profoundly without losing yourself. This is the true power of the empath, not just sensing what others miss, but transforming what you sense into medicine for the collective. If this video resonated with you, you're probably on your own empath's journey. Honor where you are. Trust the process. Do the shadow work. Integrate your gifts. And remember that every moment of overwhelm has been preparing you for your empowered expression. Remember, you're not too sensitive for this world. You're exactly sensitive enough to help transform it. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.